Brian Rowley.
Here.
Scott Foster.
Here.
Tim Choi is excused. Justin Lucer.
Here.
Gary Swanson.
Here.
And Brian Ward.
Here.
Thank you. Okay, Dan Smith is excused tonight. Okay. Just a few orders of business before we get started. No, excuse me, we'll open for public forum. It is now 6:31, public forum. Do we have anyone from the public that would like to come forward and ask questions? Seeing none, we're going to close the public forum at this time at 6:32. So just for today, we have a busy night. We have both the town and the school presenting their budgets. And I think today is going to be more of a listen carefully, and if we have questions already from the readings that we've done privately, we'll be able to ask those questions tonight. The next meeting, which is December 18th, will be specifically for questions, and those that are, let's say detailed questions with expecting a detailed response. What we'd like to do is have each member submit those by the 13th, so that would be, close of business Wednesday, and then we can get those over to the town and school, and they can collect the detailed information and have a detailed response. Certainly next Monday, we'll still, whatever questions come up and so forth, we'll be able to ask, but if you have one that requires a little research, then give them an opportunity to connect with the department heads and provide us with a qualitative response. Okay, well, with that being said, Steve, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Budget Committee, some of whom I have not met yet. My name is Steve Forman, I'm Town Manager, and I'm here to present the Town Council through fiscal year 25 budget. First is, I always like to go over what the state of the economy is right now. First of all, unemployment remains low. What you see is that black dark line is July of 2021, so we're still in pandemic. United States had an unemployment rate of 5.7%, 3.4% for the state, 3.3% for the county. Portsmouth Metro, which we're part of, was 2.9%. And at that point in time, we were 1.9%. Currently, we're at 1.5%. Basically, what they say, anything below 2% unemployment is negligible. It's the fluctuation of seasonal employment or somebody just moving in the community doesn't have a job yet situation. So our unemployment, which you hear everywhere, is for the community is pretty much almost, you can never get to zero, but it's as close as you're probably going to get. The next is the Consumer Price Index. This is the cost of goods, certain goods that we measure, different items that we do on, especially salary adjustments. Back in 2020, during the pandemic, the Consumer Price Index in the United States was 1. Then it went up to 5.4% increase. Then the year after, with the inflation, went up to 8.5. We saw that drop in the United States to increase over last year 3.2%. The Northeast Regional, 1.1% during the pandemic, 4.3% the year after. Again, 7.3% the following year, and then up 2.6% this current year. Boston, which we're part of and we measure our items against, 0.8% during the pandemic, 4.3% the year after, 7%, and now it's just an increase of 2.8%. So usually that's cost of food, oil, and that's what we're seeing. The oil prices are really stabilizing this past year, and as well as you're not seeing as much inflation as we did the previous year. I always like to show what the tax rate and what we're talking about tonight. As you can see, the local school is 67%, or $19.81 of the tax rate. The state school is $1.97, or 7%, so roughly 74% of the tax rate goes to education in Newmarket. 3%, or 92 cents of the tax rate we collect for the county. And what we're discussing tonight is, for my portion, is the 23% of the tax rate, or less than a quarter, at $6.79 per thousand. This is just a 5-year comparison. The two top nut line is the overall tax rate. The next line down is the school. Following is the town, which you can see is pretty level. I mean, $5.41 in 19 to right now $6.79. Other than that, you have the state school. Again, state school, I want to give, it's a misnomer. Sounds like we collect money, give it to the state, and they disperse it. It's not. We have to collect the money, a percentage of money that goes to the school district. So it's not a cash to the state. And finally, the county, which does go to the county for the operations, is at the bottom. An important part of this is the assessed valuation of the value of the town. In 2019, the value of the town was $977,203,228. Currently, it's $1,006,662,399. So why is that important? In 2019, for $1 tax rate, you could raise $977,203. Currently, for $1 tax rate, you raise $1,006,662. This coming year, we'll be doing everyone refers to it as a revaluation. It's not a revaluation, but last year of a statistical update, which tries to get the values up towards 100%. And why is that important? Currently, the assessed valuation of the town is 59%. We should be between 95 and 105. So we're down to 59% assessed valuation. So yeah, it's our 5th year anyway, so we have to do it. So what does that mean? If you ask your neighbors, right now a house is currently, average house we have assessed at $350,000. The market rate for that house is $650,000. And how can you prove that? You go up to somebody who has a $300,000 assessed house and ask them, what would you sell it for? They say, oh, $600,000. Okay, so that's where you can see the market. Our valuation of the town, our records has not been based with the market. On the flip side, if you look at 2011 and 12, when I first got here, we had the opposite problem. We were actually overvaluation on the town record. So we had to correct that shortly after. So, town council approved a budget of $17,687,830, or a 9% increase. It's also $1,447,813. The general fund will see an increase of $857,810. Special revenue fund, which is the recreation revolving, solid waste, and the contribution to the library, will see an increase of $181,762. And finally, the enterprise fund, which is water and sewer, which does not impact the tax rate at all. By law, we cannot use tax dollars for those, is $408,241. Those are your water and sewer rate payers. Or $10,688,430. Special revenue funds, 12%, at $2,039,963. And the enterprise funds is $4,958,437, or 28% of the budget. So where's the increase going? Well, the first item is we have $162,816 for the first year for the police contract, which was approved last year, that has now rolled into the operating budget. We have a position of a part-time communications associate at $13,520. We're seeing an increase in our health insurance of $133,769. Our guaranteed maximum rate increase is 25%. This is the pandemic boomerang that everybody was getting money for health insurance from the feds. Now we're paying through the rates. Debt service, which is our to pay off the new road project, saw an increase of $50,000. That's for the bond. Software licenses, we're seeing an increase of $12,601. Everything now, if anybody knows, whenever they buy any kind of software, you don't actually buy it. You have a subscription for a month. It's the same with us. Our financial software, our assessing software, same thing. Paving, we are proposing an increase of $40,000. Salt, we're seeing an increase of $10,000. One of the things, weather like we have tonight, and we have not had a lot of snow the last few years. That's not good for the salt budget, because if it gets to something like this, trucks have to go out more often because we actually have to sand and salt the roads. Fire part-time salaries, we're increasing $32,088. That is the new program that we're doing. We're paying firefighters a per diem, so we are having 24-hour coverage 7 days a week. Basically, we are asking communities where firefighters are on the traditional schedule of 24 hours on, 24 hours off, 24 hours on, 5 days off. Well, during those 5 to 7 days off, come work for us for a day and we'll pay you, and that way we'll have station coverage. We're finding that we're getting better coverage, and we're not having to add additional full-time staff, which would impact retirement, healthcare, and those kind of situations that a lot of communities are seeing. Library salaries are going up $44,678. That's for a new position. Solid waste collections, $35,000. We renegotiated a contract with Casella. I will say over the next probably 10, 15 years, that's going to go higher unless we have a statewide address on how we're going to, we're running out of spaces to put our solid waste. Water chemicals and sewer chemicals are going up. That is $30,000 for water, and sewer is $35,000. And sludge disposal, that's the disposal of the after product of the wastewater treatment plant. That also goes to the, currently the turnkey landfill in Rochester, and that's the increase in cost there. We are doing a one-time transfer to the sewer capital reserve fund of $293,773. That's not in, there is also an offsetting revenue side, the withdrawal from fund balance, so that's a wash. But you'll see that number in the budget. That's a rather large number, but so I just want to explain that for our budget. We do have 3 proposed warrant articles this year. One is a $1.75 million bond to repair the 4 sewer mains throughout town. This will be a loan taken out from the state revolving loan fund, and it'll have $612,000 of forgiveness. The remaining amount will be funded through ratepayers, not tax dollars, so it's the water and sewer rates. We will have a $300,000 loan to identify, engineer, purchase materials, and replace water system services to compliance with federal lead and copper rules. A lot of the services out there are still lead and copper. We need to replace those. There will be $210,000 of that $300,000 of loan forgiveness, and again, the remaining $90,000 will be raised through ratepayers. And finally, it's a $73,500 loan for stormwater planning work, finding sources of pollution within the Moonlight Brook watershed. Right now, we're still having some discharge into the Moonlight Brook. If those aren't familiar, it's the one that goes through Shanda Park. It actually goes underground in a lot of the areas in town. This would have 100% forgiveness and would have no impact on the tax rate. So while we have 3 articles and we have to ask for permission because they're loans, the amount of money that we're actually going to be raising through that is minimal. I know the Budget Committee likes to see what we're going to contribute to capital reserves. Unlike the school district, we have the authority to, our contributions to capital reserves are actually in the operating budget, not through separate warrant articles. So we'll just go through these quickly. Public Works requests in the CIP committee, it requests $150,000 to be included in the Public Works. The town council and myself recommended $75,000. Building improvement, they requested $25,000. We agreed and have $25,000. Road improvements, $250,000. We go in their capital reserve fund. Stormwater management, they requested $105,000. We placed $25,000 in the capital reserve fund. Fire department requested $51,000. We agreed and we'll funded that. Kept that at $51,000. Town cemeteries requested $10,000. We did not provide any for that one. Police dispatch equipment requested $85,126,000. We recommended $15,000 of level funding the previous year. Veterans Memorial Trust asked for $2,000, which was level funded. The 300th anniversary expendable trust that's coming up. For the last few years, we've been putting $2,000 away to celebrate our 300th. Is $2,000. Recreation facilities requested $80,000. We increased it, but from last year, but it's at $25,000. Master plan, they requested $17,000. We recommended $10,000, and the library requested $11,000, and we agreed with that $11,000. That is going to go towards, as the committee knows, that we just completed our facility study. And there are two portions that they said recommended separate from ours, recreation facilities and library. This would go towards the library facility study. Telecommunications and IT is $20,000. We did the same. And capital, compensated absences expendable trust, that is a fund that when an employee leaves and they have time built up, that we, instead of hitting the operating budget, we can dip into this fund and pay for their earned time that they have on the books, so it doesn't impact the budget. And we've had a number of retirements in the last few years, so that was starting to dwindle, so we're trying to bring that back up to $20,000. I believe our actual liability is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So if that would be if we all retired at the same time on the books, which hopefully does not happen. The revenue budget, last year, we had a revenue budget of $9.6 million. We're anticipating an increase to $10.3 million. We'll see the general fund, which is everything but property taxes, at a little about $4.4 million. The enterprise fund is water and sewer, which is 4.9. That pretty much equals or a little bit higher than what their operating budget is, because that's in and out for them. And special revenue is at $1 million. That's all the, so we have two sections for recreation. We have the general fund, which is the day administration. But special revenue is when you go to a programming and you pay a fee. That goes back into their own programs. So it doesn't go back to the fund balance. So they're able to continue with other programming. And finally, and that is our revenue. We do have a proposed default budget. This was not approved by the council yet. We just finished it end of last week. As I said, the proposed budget is at $17.6 million. Last year's operating budget was $16.4. Our default would be a little bit over $17 million at $78,955. It would be a $608,876 reduction in the proposed budget. The big one would be $232,000 that transfer that we mentioned, that actually does not impact the tax rate. Library at $73,387, and Public Works at $69,862. The council, as I said, have not approved that. This does not get approved by the budget committee. It's just an information for you. And in addition, the council can move the money around. So while it's a bottom line, even though I say $73,000 on the library, it may not be. We'll come back with a recommended. Okay, this is my warning. This is the next slide, estimate only using data we have today. And if you remember at the beginning, I said we're doing a reval. So this number will not be here next fall. This is what the tax rate compare we currently have. So town council approved budget, as we said, $17.7 million, less the revenues of $10,327,280. Then we add overlay. Overlay is money that we'll have to pay out in abatement. If somebody files a tax abatement, that's $20,000. The war service credits, that's the veterans exemptions that we offer. That's $145,000 that we have to raise. So the net town appropriation is $7,525,550. You divide that by $1,662,309 times 1,000, and you get $7.48 would be the proposed tax rate if everything were to pass. And that is the presentation on the budget. And I'm available for questions if you have some preliminary ones. And
Anybody want to start?
yeah. It is.
Is there anything preventing us from doing like a low level, almost like rolling kind of?
We actually do that.
Okay.
We do quarterly updates. So every year between so after we do the statistical update in year 5, we'll start picking up a quarter of the community and checking the market. So we'll pick up some of it. In other communities which do a reval every 5 years, this number would be much more out of whack.
Right.
So it's just, this number's so out of whack because of the market. Is what you're seeing and what you're hearing, and you know how many people go to a Christmas party and say, "I can't believe they got 700 houses are going for $700,000." This is that situation. This is the, it's 59%. Yeah. Yep. So we do, and yeah, like I said, I mean, when I got here, it was the opposite. So I did see the other way when we were over 100%. And we had to, people saw their values drop, but this is going to be a hit. I mean, and when I say that, the value goes up, the rate drops, because it's more, but it's usually a third, a third, and a third. A third of the community is going to see their property value go up, a third of the community is going to stay pretty much the same, and a third of the community is going to see their property value drop. Usually that's in manufactured homes, just because the value of that, and they don't own the land, that usually just the depreciation there. I don't know if it's going to be as much as in the past, because there's still a market for that, but that's what, you know, traditionally what happens.
So, just so we're tracking it correctly, when they do the valuations, it's, right now it's saying that our assessed values is 59% of the actual value.
Yep.
So when you go through the revaluation, everything goes up to actual value. That value of the town is going to go from 1.006 billion to 1.7 billion.
Around there.
Okay,
Yep.
and then you answered, you know, the next question is, what does that do to the mill rate? Well, the mill rate comes
Drops,
down.
right.
Because you're still talking about the same budget value divided by a larger asset value.
As I said earlier, it's about a dollar equals $1 million that we can raise. It'll be almost $2. A dollar will equal $2 million almost, if you say that 1.7, 1.75. So $1.75.
So you're, well, just looking at this, you're looking at 29.67 total, and effectively that would cut almost in half.
Yeah.
So that would go down to what, $15, $16
About
per
that.
thousand.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which is, in talking to other communities around here who have done revals, it's pretty much under 20 for most communities that are there now. Hey, and again, I've been doing the Chicken Little situation, worried that the housing market's going to crash sometime soon, and when that happens, it goes the other way.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Good.
I know.
Anybody have any other thoughts on that? Initial thoughts on the town budget?
And I know there, you know, we'd had the initial discussion last Wednesday with the council about the facility study, which I invited the budget committee to watch the presentation and read it. We are not doing on that this year. We still have some studying to do of what we want to do and how to fund it. If you saw the presentation, they're estimating that will be about $20 million, mainly to this building and the police department. The police department hasn't been upgraded since the 90s. This one, I mean, it's an 1800s building. Other than minimal renovations when we moved in here back in the 90s, there hasn't been a lot of renovations. So those are the two facilities.
Anybody? So one of the interesting things I was looking at from a ratio perspective, that the budget has grown since 2020 about 19% over that 4-year period, whereas the general inflation has actually been about 15% if you add it up. So the town's costs are exceeding inflation by about 4%.
And part of it also is we've been adding, we have added some new staff. We added a new police officer, I believe, in 2020. We've had the addition of the town engineer the year after. And this year we'll have a couple part-time, in Channel 13 director has gone full-time. We, as a town, and have been try to be good partners with the school district, and for many years have put off, while they were determining some of their issues with the school buildings, we put off a lot of our side stuff, and this is just us catching up. That's why we did the facility study. We knew we had to address it, but we always said, well, let's wait till the school determines what's gonna happen. So now it's sort of our side to catch up on some of our items. We had a facility study done, not facilities, a organizational study and an operations study done by MRI, I'm gonna say 2015. And the council at the time was expecting to find that we were operating pretty fat. MRI actually came in and said the exact opposite. The town operates dangerously lean, to the point when we have single member departments that didn't have backup. We don't, knock on wood, we're a community of 10,000 people and we still have a call fire department with 2 full-timers. That's why we do the per diem. In comparison, there's a couple communities around here, about 10,000. They have full-time fire departments, and that would add a budget of over probably $2 million. So we operate pretty lean on our side. We try to do what we can with what we have. Right? I could tell you the budget, and the department heads don't come in asking for anything out of anything they don't need. That they try to show what they need, but understand that usually we have to do the reductions later on. So it's not nobody's out there crying poverty. They said, no, this is what we'll get, and then we'll work with what we have.
So, Rich Lissavoy, who's not here this evening, but he'll probably bring this up again, but he talked about the CIP and specifically the fire department's capital request for $50,000. I'll let you explain that to everybody, and then...
Sure.
Yeah.
So last year, the budget committee gave us an additional $50,000 we put in that fund. What we've been doing, so let's roll it back. Traditional New Hampshire Yankee budgeting was, you don't buy something until you have the money in an account. So what the capital reserve funds are basically savings accounts, and we put money aside they put money aside over years for trucks, for building upgrades and those kind of situations. Well, the cost of trucks actually started outpacing the amount that we're putting aside and what we have in capital reserve fund. So what we do is we withdraw funds from the capital reserve fund and we pay a lease payment through that. What we're gonna start doing as soon as we get the next lease for the fire, which we already do for police. Police used to be that way. Every cruiser you took, the amount of the money that you were going to raise for the cruiser would go into this capital reserve fund. They would come back to the council and just withdraw it. Well, which is odd to say, but a police cruiser is actually an operational cost now, because we replace at least one a year, and we have the money. And so we took that from the contributing to the capital reserve fund, now seeing operations. We want to take lease payments and not have it go through the capital reserve fund and have it in the operating budget, so you don't have these contributions. But we have so much money in the capital reserve funds that we're trying to draw those down until such time as we start putting the lease payments in the operating budget. That should be coming up soon. But again, we have enough money in those funds to pay the the leases, but not to outright purchase a vehicle. That's why we do that. Does
How
that
much money is in the capital reserve fund then?
I'm sorry?
You say you're pulling
I
out.
do. I don't
money
have that
sitting
number
there.
in front of me. Bill, you have to come up here on the mic if you want to speak. For those who don't know, this is Bill Tappan, the Finance Director and Director of Administrative Services for the town.
Well, it's really a one-word answer. It's about just under $8 million. And I know that only because we just transferred all the capital reserve funds last week to another investment partner.
Is it 8 million?
In all of our capital reserves.
I think it's closer to 7.9, roughly.
We're getting 6% on that money?
Oh, no, we're getting better than that.
That's why we moved it to another.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Anything else? We're all going to have opportunities next.
If you want to, if you think your question is going to be a little more in depth, I'd rather have an answer. So if you want to just shoot me or the chair an email, we'll make sure we get that to all the members as well.
Yeah, shoot anything to me, and I'll
Yeah.
consolidate everything, and I'll separate them for the town and the school. But I'll specifically indicate who's asking the question, so next week, it'll be your question, they'll be able to respond to you and address your thoughts and concerns.
So another
Yeah.
question, there's about $500,000 in the undesignated fund balance that was used. So still got my head a little bit around that. Is that some of the rollover, or is that like the reserve?
No, that's what people would refer to as surplus.
Okay.
It's not cash on hand. We don't have a bank account with that money sitting there. It's an accounting practice. But we were able to use that money to offset increases. Again, a lot of communities, and you see this in the smaller ones, is they will use it to buy down the tax rate, which when I got here, they were in trouble for doing that because they bought down the tax rate one year, and then they didn't have the money to refill it the next year, so you had an artificial reduction and then a spike the following year on the budget. We put in a fund balance policy that we have to keep between 5 and 10%, 5 and 15%. 5 is the minimum, and at all time for our fund balance. That, and what that number is what we are obligated to pay, not only the town's budget, but what we have to pay to the school district, and what we have to pay to the county in case of emergency. We have those funds in there. We also have a policy, and part of that policy is that we cannot use the money to artificially buy down the tax rate as it was previously done. We have to budget it. So that way is if we didn't have that money, we would reduce the operating budget. If you ever notice, the number that it usually lines up with is the contributions to the capital reserve funds. So it's basically, okay, we're taking some money from our surplus and we're going to put it in our savings. So we don't want to impact operations by basing operations on the fund balance either.
Okay, thank you
Right.
very much.
Ed, all set to leave, or?
I think so.
Okay.
I think, we'll save our questions for you next week.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's actually kind of nice to be able to
They
be.
only left you 5 minutes.
What's that?
They only left you 5 minutes.
We have to be done by 7 o'clock. It's actually kind of nice to hear the town's presentation as well. I'm not a Newmarketer, so it's actually nice to hear the town's presentation, and helps give me context too, so I appreciate that. When I was here with you 2 weeks ago, I gave you all a handy dandy binder of our school district budget, and that is what I'm going to work from to explain to you where we are at. I always like to start at the end. So I'm going to ask everybody to turn to page 7, because that kind of gives you a very quick summary. If you look on page 7 of your binder, it has a breakdown of expenditures to the district by category. And so what I want people to see is that everything I'm about to talk to you about over the next however long is all included in that 4.3% number. So if you look at the lower right-hand column of that grid, you'll see 4.3%, that's circled. That's the total appropriations increase that the 24-25 school district budget is proposing, okay? And everything within that is broken out by the various operating cost centers. You see the elementary school and all the different departments, technology, facilities, and so forth. If you look on page 8, you will see there is a chart there that breaks it down a little differently. Referring back to the chart on page 7, you see the total proposed budget is $27,372,282. The chart on page 8 kind of shows you how that breaks out. I do think, because it doesn't come up a lot in my presentation, I did want to stop and just take a moment to highlight the $2,096,903, which is debt service that the district has. That is the bond that is being paid on the beautiful schools that the community invested in 6 years ago. I comment on this whenever I get a chance, because they are fantastic schools now, but there is an economic reality to that, and that means that for the next, until 2046, we are paying a bond of $2,096,000, and it goes down a little bit, but it doesn't drop below $2 million before it's retired in 2046. One of the things that is important to note now is that bond debt is 8% of our total budget we're proposing, and for a small town, that's a pretty high level of bond debt. I mean, clearly the investment in the schools was needed, but it's just important that people keep that in mind. And just as a mathematical concept, as the cost of living causes the budgets to continue to go up, the percentage of the budget that is bond debt goes down. So relatively speaking, like last year when I was speaking to you, it was closer to 9%. Well, we're making progress. The number isn't changing, but it's because, it's as a percentage of the total budget. So anyway, so that's the bottom line. So everything I'm about to talk to you about is covered in those two charts. So now I'm going to ask you to flip back to page 1. Now, one of the things I like to highlight to people when we talk about the budget process in the school district is one of the things that I've tried to instill, and I have to commend Jenna Mellon, my business administrator, who is kindly here tonight. And actually, I'll highlight Andy Corman is also here tonight, a high school, middle school principal. But one of the things we have attempted to do is really build a collaborative budget process. And so one of the things we started this process with is, okay, what are the goals that we have for the development of this budget? On page 1, I highlight for you the 6 goals that we set out to try to meet. Goal number 1, to keep the overall budget increase below 5% while absorbing the cost into the local budget of 2 previously grant-funded mental health staff. I'll talk to you about that in a little bit. Goal number 2, to provide funding to support all ongoing school improvement efforts. Third goal, to fund the newly developed school district capital improvement plan. One of the things that came up last year when we were going through the budgeting process, I did my first capital improvement committee meeting with the town, and one of the things that was very clear to us at that point that the school district needed to actively develop a long-range capital improvement plan. I'm pleased to report that with the hard work of David Riley, our facilities director, we now have a fully fleshed out 20-year capital maintenance plan. So we know what our costs are. And one of the things we wanted to do was to make sure that the operating budget included the costs needed to implement that plan. And I'll talk to you about that in a little bit. Goal number 4 was to maintain competitive salaries to keep high-quality staff in the district. One of the things you may recall last year, there was a para contract on the warrant, and one of the things we had to do is make some pretty substantial adjustments to our hourly rates we were paying our paraprofessionals. One of the exciting things I can report to you is we're this close to being fully staffed, which is very exciting, and Newmarket has not been fully staffed in a very long time, but we're about to be. In fact, maybe I'll go back to the office tomorrow and find out we are 100%. But the adjusting of salaries was a big part of that, is to take a look at the jobs people had and make sure we were paying competitive rates to not only get people to take a job initially, but to stay here long term and help us really build something. So we really did a lot of work on that. And so so any funding regarding salary adjustments for positions that we needed to do, that's included here, including the costs of the para contract that was approved as a separate warrant last year and now is in the operating budget this year. The 5th goal was to absorb the impact of increased health care costs and erratic state funding. I talked to you about this last time we were here. State funding, with the whole concept of adequacy aid, has kind of been all over the place, and it's been very challenging to try to build a budget that keeps costs, and more importantly to the people in Newmarket, is the tax rate relatively stable. That's been a challenge to do. And then, as Steve mentioned, healthcare costs are also an ongoing challenge that organizations deal with. I'm actually pleased to report to you that we lucked out on our insurance, and because our utilization rates were so positive from an insurance perspective, we only had a 3.7% health insurance increase. And I attribute that to our employees, taking full advantage of many of the health benefits that are there and fully utilizing the opportunities to stay healthy. So, but that benefited us as a district, because when we started building this budget, we were envisioning 10% plus increase, and we only ended up 3.7. So that was exciting. And then certainly the last goal, which is always there, and any time you're doing budgeting or finance, is to just be a responsible steward of the community's money. I think, Steve did a great job explaining to you, the town's needs, and I think the school districts, we need to work as partners, and we need to be aware of what the school budget is, how it's impacting people, not just from a standpoint of making sure we provide the best quality schools we possibly can, but also being aware of that. So we really tried to balance those two things as we entered into this. So obviously schools are about students, and so one of the things we often need to do is to take a look at enrollments. So if you flip to page 3, I want to talk a little bit about school enrollment with you. Every year we have a demographic study and long-range projections done by NESDEC. NESDEC is the New England School Development Council. They do actually enrollment projections for schools all over New England. And every year they give us these projections. I'd like to point out that all of the numbers in this chart through the FY24 are actual bodies. The FY25, clearly it hasn't happened yet. Those are the projections that they're giving us for next year. Based on what NESDEC is telling us, we're going to have, as compared to this year, where we have 990 students, if you look at that pink line at the bottom of that chart, they're projecting us to drop to 971 next year. One of the things I do want to acknowledge is if you look at the pattern of enrollment in Newmarket for the last, in this case, shows 8 years worth of data. Generally speaking, we have a declining enrollment pattern, and that's not unusual. Newmarket there's nothing wrong in Newmarket other than we're part of a region that is experiencing a gradual decline. State of New Hampshire, they're projecting across the board in the next 10 years, we're going to have 15% fewer students in the state. So clearly, declining enrollment is an ongoing thing. I do want to point out one aberration, though. The projections that NESDEC gave us last year, and when I was reporting to you last year, they told us we were going to have 961 students this year. Clearly, we have 990 students. One of the interesting things is the pandemic did a lot of weird stuff to particularly those preschool age kids and those early school enrollees. And this year in particular, we kept asking, like, where are all the babies that were born in this community? Because you look at the actual numbers, and they're every year there's 95 to 100 children born connected to Newmarket. Where are they? Well, many of them showed up in our kindergarten class this year, which was contrary to the projections that we got. So you'll see for this fall, if you look at our kindergarten enrollment, we have 85 kindergartners. When we were talking projections with NESDEC last year, they said 61 was what we were going to have. So we were very pleasantly surprised, shall we say, to have 24 more kindergartners than we had. And the other area where we have seen an uptick has been from 5th to 6th grade. We saw an increase of about 10% from 5th to 6th grade. And what seems to be happening to some extent is the community. The pandemic did a lot of things to a lot of families in terms of the decisions that they made about schooling, and I think we're starting to see people making different decisions and being more comfortable with the public school setting. So the optimist in me says I think we're going to see a pattern, particularly in the early childhood years. And actually we have seen a number of families that have left the community for, particularly in the middle and high school years, to go to private school, return to Newmarket here in the last year. So there is something going on here. But clearly, again, based on the projections, NESDEC is saying 971. When we plan our budget, I'm going to tell you, we use a very complex calculation. We call it butts and seats. So, really, when you get down to it, it's like you can give a projection of who you think is going to be here next year, or you can say, well, who do we have right now? So instead of trying to guess who's going to be in the 2nd grade class next year, it's probably more accurate to say who's in the 1st grade class and then just move them forward. So as we have done our planning, that's what we've done. And so I want you to see that we are tracking those projections and keeping that in mind as we make decisions about staffing and so forth. And there is no question about it, a general trend of decline. And one of the things that the board and I have been talking about is what are some things we can do? Because with the beautiful schools that we've built, we now have capacity that maybe we can utilize that in some way to balance things. Yeah,
What
Chris.
is the capacity? Obviously, it's different by grade, but what if you were to just, to expected capacity based on your student head counts per teacher and things like that?
Well, I would actually have to do a
And
little.
physical plan.
We need to do a little more analysis. I mean, the capacity from the standpoint of space, there's no question that we have space for it. In fact, Andy feels confident we could take in 100 more high school age students and not necessarily need to increase staff in any way, shape, or form. Less capacity at the elementary level, but there is some there. But that's something we're taking a look at, trying to get our heads around what is our long-range capacity of the facility itself, and if we were to pursue something to make up for these decreases in enrollments, such as looking for another town to come and join us, we would want to have a full understanding of that. So anyway, so those are our projections, and we do those every year. Now I'm going to ask you to flip to page 5, and that gets to our staffing plan, because obviously you have the kids, and then you say, okay, what is the staff you need to run your school? This year, we have exactly 200 FTE. If you look at the bottom of the chart where it's in the red, we have 200 FTEs would be considered a fully staffed Newmarket school system. That's a very nice even number. It's exactly 200. Now, by the way, that doesn't mean there are 200 human individuals. There's actually probably more than that because there's a number of part-time positions and so forth. But when you break it down into what's called FTEs, 200 is the number of FTEs that makes up our entire system. You'll notice for the proposed budget for 24-25, we're recommending the reduction by 2.44 FTEs, which represents a drop of 1.2% in total of staffing. To just bring you back to last year when we presented the budget, we had reduced last year by 7.35 FTE. So between last year and this year, we've reduced by 9.5 FTEs, which is about 4 to 5% of the total. And part of what that's doing is adjusting staff to align with the enrollments that we have and the program needs that we have. Because one of the things we do, whenever a position comes open in the district, we have a conversation about it. We say, okay, well, is this position as currently constituted an essential position? If the answer is yes, then obviously we fill it as is. If it's not an essential position, we ask, is there another function that this position could fill that is essential that we haven't been able to fulfill, and we might repurpose it, and that would be 2. But if the answer is no to both those questions, we don't fill the position. And we have done that in multiple settings over the last couple of years. Because I think it's really important as you retool, you don't always just add things. You need to stop and ask yourself, what do you need? And are there places to retool or repurpose a position? And so as I talk about the individual programs in the schools, I think you'll find that we're beginning to make those adjustments. So anyway, so that's the staffing plan. If you look on page 6, one of the things that's really hard to get your head around, because when you talk about a total school operating budget of, let's flip back to page 7, a total school operating budget proposed at $27,372,282. Things can get lost in a big number like that. And so what we try to do is to capture what's different in this budget compared to previous budgets. So on page 6, you'll see two charts there. The top one is trying to capture, based on the 3 main cost centers in our budget, salaries, benefits, and operations. What does it look like if we did nothing different? So if we just brought everything forward and did it as it was, or if we made changes. So we're trying to show you what's new here. So if you look at this chart, you see in salaries, we are looking at, if we were to, there's $67,006 of new money in salaries, okay? The column that says level, that's referring to things that if you just brought it forward, you'd have to pay it anyway. So if like in salaries, the para contract, for example, we're obligated to those things. So that money's coming forward. So in terms of increases in our salaries, we've got $67,006 there. In benefits, as Steve mentioned, health benefits are costly. There's $35,706 new dollars, and so a level would be $257,000. And if you look at the operating line, you'll see that there's $135,079 new dollars, and if we did level funding, it would be $205. So basically what it comes down to, in the first column, it's saying to you, the total increase of our budget is $1,140,497, and it adds up to the salaries, benefits, and operations. If we left it completely level, it would be $902,706. So if you're thinking about what's new here, we've added about $237,000 of new money. I mentioned before, one of our goals was to cover the cost of 2 mental health professionals that had previously been grant funded. You may have heard about ESSER funding, which was a big thing during the pandemic. We had a school social worker who has become extremely important to us, and another school counselor dealing with at-risk kids. And they were both grant funded under ESSER. And ESSER expires in September of '24. We needed to find a home for it. That's roughly the equivalent value that $237,000 represents, just to give you a basis of comparison. So that gives you an idea of what we're trying to do differently. The graph here just kind of gives it to you in terms of more of a visual, to give you an idea of where are you seeing the most new money. The most new money is coming into operating costs. So I would now jump ahead to page 9. We talked, actually, when I was here a couple of weeks ago, we talked about this quite a bit in terms of the state aid. Obviously, when we are dealing with, when we're talking about revenues and so forth, clearly we get money from the state in 2 forms, and this kind of gives you the history of that money. If you're looking at the chart on the bottom of page 9, the black bar at the bottom, that's the good money, the net grant that is not having to be taxed locally. And you can see the peak of our net grant was FY 2023 when we got just over $3 million. Last year it dropped to $2,607,000, and for next year, and this was, remember I mentioned spoiler alert when I come back, it's slightly better this year. Well, the net grant is going up by $322,000. So on the plus side, that means for next year we have $322,000 more grant money than we had this year, which is positive because that's $322,000 not needing to be collected locally. What you will see in the top is that swept that I talked about, the statewide education property tax. And actually, at the board meeting last week, Andrew Haimker, one of our board members, mentioned something, and I checked it out, and he was right. The swept rate that Newmarket pays is actually one of the top 10 highest rates in the state of New Hampshire. And that's out of 177 municipalities, just to give you an idea. So there's no question that when the state is doing its calculating, Newmarket has, in the last couple of years, absorbed a heavier burden than the state at large. Our swept rate for next year is going to be, well, actually for right now, it's $1.97. For the state, the average is $1.44. So I just put that out for you to say that, because in the end, the Department of Revenue Administration determines where the money is coming from. And so clearly with $4,100 per kid being considered the adequate education, and we can debate whether that's real or not, that's what's being calculated. So they take our average daily membership, multiply that by the $4,100, and that's how much money we're supposed to get, and then they do these fancy calculations, and we get so much in grants, and the other part comes in swept. Unfortunately for us this year, the swept went up quite a bit more than past years. Next year, it's dropping by about 100,000.
So another way to think of it is swept is what the state tells us to collect from property
Correct.
taxes that we have to because of the state.
And they call it state aid, even though it's coming directly out of the pockets of Newmarket people and coming straight back to this town.
So the higher that number is, the more we have to collect automatically. And
Yes.
increases our tax rate.
Yes.
Without us doing it.
He said it better than I did. Thank you, Jerry.
I learned last week, so.
Yeah, hey, thanks. Thanks for paying attention during my last talk.
Why are we in the top 10%?
You know, that's a great question, and I think it does to some extent tie into some of the other stuff that Steve was talking about, property values and assessments and so forth. And I think if you look at the demographic of the community, a lot of like the state aid calculations are about what they call need.
Yeah.
we have a relatively low percentage of kids that are on free and reduced lunch or in that category of need. So when it comes to coming up with what is considered need, and the grant, by the way, is more in favor of what they consider to be need, we're getting less of that because we're perceived to be less needy. We have a relatively high property value, so somehow that's got to be teased out. I would say one of the things when Steve was talking, I actually, in my town a couple of years ago, we went through a property reevaluation, and one of the things that does happen is neighbors start noticing each other's houses much more, and you start doing a cost comparison. Wait a minute, how is it your house is the same as mine? How come your house is worth more than mine? And so be ready for that, because that does come up.
I'm sorry, I was just gonna say, free and reduced lunches, and Janet can correct me, but we used to have a pretty high, significant number of people doing free and reduced. And after the pandemic, there's free lunches, so no one applied. And those numbers are used for a lot of the grants, and a lot of the funding calculus, so unfortunately, we try to get people to apply, and we haven't got as many people as we previously had on it, so.
So by having our relatively lesser calculation based on need, I think it's being made up more in the SWEP calculation, because they still have to provide us with what's considered for
You
the
had
adequate.
mentioned that last time.
Yeah, I think this year, it was a perfect storm of increased swept, decreased adequacy, and next year it gets a little bit better. It's not back to if you go back to FY '22, that was probably the best year. No, actually, I guess I take that back. '23 was probably the best year. So anyway, so I just wanted to make you aware of that. So do you have a question?
Based on what you were mentioning, what Gary mentioned, do you have any sense of the actual population that actually needs extra services? And what I mean by that is that if we have, I think you were saying last week that it had a lot to do with, say, people that apply for school lunch programs and things of that nature. So people that are in these different programs, do we feel that you're actually capturing all the students that should be in those programs, or do you think there's a certain percentage that you're not capturing?
I definitely think there's a percentage we're not capturing. Right, what's you want to probably talk about free and reduced lunch for a minute?
We were partially seeing that because there are kids who don't get lunch, presumably because the parents can't afford it and they don't want to apply for it. So there's kids who don't eat. So there's a reason those kids aren't eating. And it's probably not because they're not hungry. You have a kid, in high school.
Kids are always hungry.
Yeah, Janet actually runs the, you want to talk about free and reduced lunch?
Right. Well, we do have a policy that any child can access a meal, because hungry kids don't learn. They just don't. But to Gary's point, there are some kids whose parents say, don't go get a lunch, we don't have money on the account, and they're not going to be the ones that speak up. To the question that you had about are we capturing all the need, there are always going to be parents who will not apply, whether it's a sense of embarrassment, or they just don't want to be identified that way, or they just don't complete the work that's needed to do it. But I will also say this, that your Newmarket has become a very attractive place for a certain demographic of people to come. So years ago, it was much more blue collar. There was a lot different demographic, right? So we had a higher percentage of families that were here that maybe were in a lower income bracket. Those families can't afford to live here anymore. And so what you're getting is a demographic that's moving in that is more affluent. So therefore, when you do that, you have a decrease in the number of kids that actually have the need. So it's a combination of the two things that you mentioned.
What is the current free and reduced lunch rate?
It's under, it's right around 20%.
Is that high? I think it's not under.
Yeah, I think it's right around, I'll have to go back and look at it. It changed as of October 1st, but it's definitely not, it's not high enough for us to take advantage of some other programs like community eligibility, where everybody gets free. We definitely aren't anywhere close to that. And we did pick up a bunch of folks. The other thing that has been difficult is the income, what they set for criteria for income levels. They use it nationally. The only areas that don't have the same conditions are like Hawaii and Alaska. So if you think about what the costs are to live in, say, Alabama versus what it is to live up here in New Hampshire, those people, our families are still judged by that some economic criteria. So, you think of that too, because there are some people, if you think that there's no need in this community, where there certainly is. There are a lot of people that are living right at the level, but because the cost of living is so high up here, even though they're making an income, they just either just are over that limit or close enough that they don't qualify for those types of things. So it makes it challenging up here. We just have a higher cost of living in the Northeast.
And it isn't, there's a lot of outreach being done.
Oh, yeah.
Jana's office, through our social workers,
Oh, yeah.
trying to identify people, but it is very challenging, particularly since we're coming off the pandemic where everybody got a free lunch because
Right.
that's the way the program worked. And now you have to reintroduce yourself to all these people, and we're getting there.
Yeah.
But it does have a negative impact on the revenue side of the equation because
Right.
the percentage that they're using may not reflect the real need in our community.
And one of the things that's absolutely crazy making is they've got the income levels for the free and reduced lunch that we have to abide by. But, and so the qualification is if a student or a family qualifies for SNAP, which is the benefit through the state, through DHHS, they automatically get free and reduced lunch. But the income levels for SNAP are different than they have for here. So people may apply for free and reduced, they don't get it here. So we have to encourage them, go ahead and apply for SNAP, because even though we can't give you free and reduced lunch, if you qualify up there, we can give it to you. So it's crazy making. There's no, and I think some of it is because those levels are set at the state level and these levels are set at the federal.
But when that happens, the adequacy isn't calculated.
Well, we
Right.
try and direct people to do that, but we
The
can't.
SNAP part doesn't get calculated, right? You're helping them out, but
But they would
No,
qualify
if
for
they-
free and
if they-
reduced
if
lunch.
they
Right.
got
And
SNAP,
then
they
we
would-
they would count that.
They
out.
would
They
count.
They
Oh,
would
would
do.
they? Okay.
Yeah, it's just
Okay.
that we can't fill out any of that paperwork for people. We
Okay,
can
gotcha.
direct them to it, we can encourage them to do it, but we can't actually interact in any way
Yeah.
with the state. So that's a little bit frustrating, and there are some families that are just at that need, so.
Yeah, so clearly all of this, there's a number of issues there, but ultimately it comes down to, as I mentioned earlier, and we talked about last time, just the erraticness of the monies that are coming from the state, and we have to keep that in mind as we budget, because we gotta look out for that. So I'm gonna stop there on the big picture. Are there any other questions on what I've said so far before I go into the elementary school, middle school, and the high school, and what we're doing there? Yes?
As you've adjusted salaries, have you seen retention rates increase or turnover rates decrease?
Well, we've made the adjustments within the last year and a half, so there's a lot of people who, when we made the
Right.
adjustments, are still with us.
Yep.
But I don't think we have enough, longitudinal information to say for sure. I will tell you that when we have openings, we're noticing a wider range of applicants, and that's definitely a positive. And I think, in fact, when I first took this job, I had a person ask me, what are you going to do about the turnover rate, particularly amongst administrators, and wanting to know, is it just money? And it isn't just money, for sure. But building a positive culture requires you to start by getting good people in roles and in keeping them long enough to actually accomplish things. And so I think we're starting to get some traction, and I think there's some positivity there. I would tell you, in the two areas that I can say with some confidence, that the para contract in particular, I meet with the para leadership all the time, and the positivity and their feelings about their work environment have definitely improved dramatically. And that has also resulted in more people wanting to work, so we're able to be closer to fully staffed so that people are less stressed by being pulled in multiple different directions during the run of a day. So that's anecdotal, but I hope that in time, maybe next year, I can give you a more direct answer, like, did it make a difference? I definitely feel it's making a difference to get good people to apply, and then we just have to do the work and create the culture that makes them want to stay.
How do you compare the salaries to like Portsmouth, Exeter, Worcester River? Is it on par with
Depends on what you're talking, which category you're talking about. I mean, our para group, we actually, when we did the negotiations, we did a lot of comparing to all, and so we are very competitive with Exeter, Oyster River, Portsmouth, because one of the things that I think was and I understand why, given that we're a small town, I think people tended to think, well, let's compare ourselves to other small towns, but we are where we are, and so the people we're drawing from have the option to work in Exeter, Oyster River, Portsmouth, Hampton, and so we needed to do that. So with the para contract, absolutely. Teacher contract is definitely not as competitive. It's a decent contract, but it's not as competitive. Our administrative contracts are definitely competitive. All of our non-collective bargaining people, those contracts are competitive. We set the goal of getting everybody in the top 25%. That's where we wanted to be. We didn't necessarily want to be the best, but we wanted to make sure that if we're going to attract the best people, we were paying the right wage. Any other questions before I go into the various programs? And I will be quicker about this because I know people have places to go. So the elementary school, you'll see there's a fairly limited to talk about there. I mean, clearly, staffing-wise, we aligned everything with the enrollments we had. We do try to keep in the up through grade 2, we try to keep to 18 or fewer students in a class, and then it goes up to 22 beyond that. So we do, particularly in the early grades, we try to keep those numbers low because that's how we can best keep kids on track. You will notice if you compare the elementary school budget to the middle school and the high school budget, you'll notice the total increase to elementary school is higher than the other two areas. The reason for that is quite simply we have more retirements coming out of the junior and senior high, and there have been a couple of positions that we had vacancies in that we opted not to fill at the junior and senior high school level. So percentage-wise, you may see those personnel areas drop a little more. At the elementary school, we haven't made staffing reductions there because it just wasn't appropriate. And so that the number is relatively higher there because it's showing retirement and salaries and all of those things. So anyway, so the elementary school, key programs that are going on at the elementary school, we are in the process of doing a literacy program review for adopting a K-5 literacy program, which will have, it has monies for that adoption of that program is budgeted. And we also have a math program that was adopted 3 years ago that has a significant amount of consumables with it, and the monies for that are budgeted in this in this operating budget. And I would be remiss if I didn't stop and say we just opened the new playground over at the elementary school, and that certainly is a exciting highlight. If you get a chance to go over and watch the kids play on the new playground, it's quite an exciting thing for them. Any questions about the elementary school? Then I'll move to the junior high, and you'll notice I oscillate between junior high and middle school. The reason I have to do that is because we are officially calling ourselves a junior high, and educationally we're not a junior high, we're a middle school. And so one of the things I'm actively lobbying is to start talking about changing our name. A junior high, for those of you who are from a bygone era of education, is largely, the reason it's called junior high is because the structure is basically the same as a high school, except you lower the drinking fountains and smaller desks, but it's largely the same structure. And a middle school is much more catered to the age group, and a middle school audience is 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds, what we would call 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And the program is structured around teams, it's around integration of education. So when you hear me make that back and forth, know that it's not because I'm going crazy, it's because we call ourselves a junior high, but we really function as a middle school. So a lot of the things that they do over there are middle school philosophy under a junior high name. Things to keep in mind, basically the way that junior high is structured is a middle school, and they have a team at each grade level. So grade 6 has a core team of 4 teachers of math, science, social studies, and language arts. 7th grade, same thing. 8th grade, same thing. And then they all have a series of unified arts that they rotate through, and so that's where that, when you go down to the enrollments, you'll see that that's the way that's mapped out. You can see that our 6th grade for this year is 83. Next year we're projecting at 79. Seventh grade, they're projecting it to be at 83, and then eighth grade projecting to be 71. So basically, the enrollments in the middle school age is going to be stable. If you look at the operating costs, I mean, you will notice overall the whole budget for the junior high portion of the program is down 0.03%. It's not a big decrease, but just to note that compared to the elementary school, you see a decline there. Any questions about the junior high, middle school portion of this budget? Okay, on to the high school. The high school is, one of the things I'm very proud of this year, we just completed a district-wide process to adopt a vision of a graduate. Hopefully many of you may have seen it and maybe even thrown in your 2 cents for what you wanted it to be, but on October 19th of this fall, our school board approved a vision of a graduate. And a vision of a graduate is a series of transferable skills underneath a philosophy statement that you're trying to accomplish for all your graduates. So if you can imagine, in the ideal world, when a Newmarket graduates from Newmarket High School, what do we want them to have accomplished? What do we want their experience to have been? What do we want them to be able to do? And we spent a lot of time in the last couple of years getting there, and it was a very proud moment for the district when we finally approved that. And now the real work begins, which is to take that document and say, okay, how does this transform program? And so what you're going to be seeing starting this year and in years to come, you'll start to see adjustments that are going to show up. And that does, many of the position changes that Andy has made are tied into realizing the vision of a graduate. So looking at broadly looking at the operating costs of the high school, you'll see that the total high school budget on page 18 is up 1.4%. And as Steve pointed out, with inflation running 3 to 4%, that's obviously bringing things down. And there are a couple of things that we're in the process of really trying to reinvent. One is to develop a very strong multi-tiered system of support for our students, so that we're making sure kids that are falling behind have supports and opportunities. So we're really trying to make sure that is happening. And that, by the way, is true across the district. And the other piece that we are actively trying to do is to look at ways to personalize the experience that kids have as they come through our schools and make sure that the programming options they have meet kids' needs. We're trying to really look at extended learning opportunities. We have a position that manages that. We're trying to look at opportunities like SST, which is the Career Tech Center, and then also looking in-house at the course offerings we're providing. Because we are a small school, you can't have everything, but what is the things that are going to get us the biggest bang for our buck? And we're trying to make those adjustments as we go. So any questions about the high school program? And actually, Andy is here if you have any specific questions you'd like him to answer.
I just, not specifically budget related, but I am curious if you want me to know what you think the success rates are for students going through those courses.
Yeah, it's a very high. Andy, it actually, probably our biggest challenge is being able to offer enough AP courses internally, but what we find is the kids who take them are successful at a very high level. Trying to remember off the top of my head, we were talking about this just the other day, but like AP Stats in particular was one that jumped out. I think there were like 23 kids that were doing AP Stats.
Yeah, we so for the 22 school year, we did not drop below 375 for a mean score. It's a 5-point system. 5 is perfect. 1 is you showed up and put your name on it. Colleges generally start accepting kids' credit at that 3 level. Quick math, 20, 21, 90 kids in the 22 school year took 1 or more AP exams.
And for a school that has, we have a senior class of 71 kids, it actually is pretty remarkable. the number of kids that are taking those advanced placement courses. I think our challenge is going to be how do we keep them available, given that our population is declining.
Yeah, just a second here, so, that's Andrew, correct? Okay, no, I'm just saying it for the stenographer.
Oh,
Okay, so she's clear, so
Andrew
Corman,
Corman,
thank you.
yes. Okay, so moving on to the student services part of the narrative. One of the things that a lot of times people struggle with, this is on page 19, a lot of times people struggle with is they want to know what do we have control over with regards to special education services and so forth. And the process, I mean, the fact is the law requires that we provide special education services. So a lot of the programming we do, it's required by law, so there isn't like a choice to not provide these services. That being said, that's the legal part of it. The moral part of it is, you really need to meet the needs of all of your students and the wide range of needs that they have. And you can see, if you look at the chart on page 219, our projected identified students will have individualized learning plans in 2024 is just up over 109. I think it's 191 is the exact number. And you can see that has been gradually going up since 2020. And to answer the question, do you think that's related to the pandemic? Absolutely. There's no question in my mind that more people are seeking out student services than probably did pre-pandemic. And I'd like to think that once we kind of get over this hump and sort of gradually get people back on track, there'll be a little less of it. But there's no question statistically, it's pretty clear what's happening.
Do you have any statistics as to how much it costs per student to provide, or is it just variable in terms of every student requires different things?
It's highly variable. I mean, you have kids, you could have a student that has an IEP that is just about modifications made in a regular education classroom setting, and really all that cost is a case manager drafting a plan and then distributing it and making sure that the classroom teachers know what to do, and that's the level of involvement, all the way up to the child that has a full-time aide that needs to be with them for a variety of reasons, or when we talk about real costs, kids that because of their needs need to be placed in a program that Newmarket can't provide, such as we often hear the term out-of-district placement, and those can be pricey, but again, it's based upon decisions being made by the team to determine what's best for that student. And so it's, while oftentimes when you look at the numbers, it can be pricey, like about 20% of our budget is special education services, but it's to meet the needs of students. If you look on the special education staffing, I just wanted to make a quick point about the staffing levels. You'll see the chart on page 20. It shows pre-K. You see it says 6 with 2 asterisks. Keep in mind that our pre-K program is primarily a special education program, and the goal is to identify kids in preschool age that may have learning challenges. If we can address those and get them on track by the time they start kindergarten, that's in the best interest of everybody. So the numbers tend to be lower at that level. But typically, once you get into our school settings, basically each case manager has 10 or 11 students that they're managing on a daily basis. So
It sort of falls under the category of making an investment at that age, because obviously you have 6, is it 6 students or 6 professionals?
6 per teacher. So they're basically, the way it's structured, there are 2 preschool teachers. They offer a morning session and an afternoon session. So basically in each session there are 6 kids. So you're basically talking about a total of at least 24 students that are being serviced by those 2 case managers. But that's the way they're managed, because the class is set up with, you have those students that are that are identified, but then you also have what they call mentor students. So there's other students that are regular ed students that are there to kind of create more of a collaborative classroom environment.
How do you do that in pre-K?
It's voluntary. Parents can put their name, can submit and sign up, and basically if you get selected to be one of the mentor, there's a cost associated with it, but your child can do preschool in Newmarket.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, there's probably 24, 25 of those. Any other questions about student services?
So I was just wondering on the out-of-district, what's added, 100, it increased by 122,000, but for 8 students placed out of district, how much did it cost us to do that?
Can you answer that, Jan? Give her a minute to
Sure.
do some math. But it's, yeah, we'll come back to that one.
We can loop back to it
Yep,
later, that's fine.
any other questions besides that one, which Jen is going to do some math for? Okay. All right, so why don't we move on? The next page, it gets into ESOL students, English as a second language. Clearly, when students come to us that are not native English speakers, clearly we need to provide programming to make sure that they can be successful. And you can see over the years, and we have one ESOL teacher that deals with both the elementary, middle, and high, kind of going all over the place, and one tutor that also floats around. And that's with multiple languages and so forth. But this year we have 18 students that are being served by those 2 individuals. And I would say that's a very successful program, because one of the things you'll notice is a lot of times they try to incorporate that into the regular day programs too. So you'll see celebrations of Spanish culture and other things like that that just permeate the whole school. So it's definitely a worthwhile investment. On page 22, you can see the total district student services budget. You can see it's up 3.42% in total. How are we doing, Jenna? So $909,000, and that's with a $122,000 increase.
You said 900 and
909.
909?
And keep in mind when you're talking about
$100,000 per student.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
pricey. One of the things we talk about when we try to prepare in the future, when we start thinking about out-of-district placements, a high-end placement of an out-of-district student can be as much as $250,000, depending on the need and the placement and all of the variables that can go into it. If you're, for example, you could be transporting a kid from Newmarket to somewhere in Massachusetts every day. You're paying for the travel, but you're also paying for a specialized program, and so it can be as much as that. A low-end out-of-district placement is, $50,000, $75,000. So that's the range.
How much reimbursement do we get? Because that's obviously supporting a unique situation. Do we get reimbursement specifically for that type of
Yeah, it ends
services?
up being somewhere around 70% of it we get reimbursed for.
Is that part of your budget line item in terms of reimbursement for that?
It's under the revenues. It's under revenues. We anticipate it.
Okay.
And let me try to get to that page for you. Thank you. Top of page 10.
Page 10?
So, so top of page 10, you'll see the revenues are listed here, and I'm trying to spot it. Yeah, special education, so yeah, there we go. So we're getting 296,275, and then
I'm sorry, were you seeing that, please?
I'm on page 10,
Yeah.
under state revenues.
Second section, state revenues.
Okay, state revenues? All right.
Yep.
Yeah,
Third one, anything?
okay, so you see special
And then,
education aid.
and then down below, note that there is federal grants that are coming, and those are, many of those are special education related. Like Medicaid is entirely special education,
Okay,
and that's at the bottom of that column.
great, thanks for pointing that out.
Okay, so moving on to curriculum, that's the next section. I won't get into a lot of details because surprisingly, even though we're a school, we actually don't have to spend a lot of money on curriculum because that's mostly in the minds and it's the time and it's the efforts that people have. And so Patty Wands, our Director of Curriculum Instruction, has listed all the things that are ongoing. For the most part, of the curriculum initiatives that are going on, the literacy program is going to involve a cost because we're going to be purchasing a new program. And then obviously digital learning tools, as Steve pointed out, those are all ongoing costs. You pay subscription costs for those. But for the most part, most of these things are just the time and energy of our staff to make those things happen. And then the page 25 gives you the breakdown of the general assessment and general administration of the district. And that includes basically my office and everything I do, and the school board and everything they do and all that stuff. And then really the last section is all the operational things. And while I don't want to gloss over it, because we've kind of mentioned a lot of stuff, the narrative is relatively short. Our business and finance office, I have to say, any chance I get to commend Jana, I want to do it in public, because there's been so many things that we have done as a district that have gone through our finance office. We just completed a major upgrade of our financial software, which is giving us a much better ability to track things. We've done the salary studies we've talked about. Those came through that office, and that's been big. We're doing a lot of work around improving our hiring processes and all those kind of things, but that's coming out of the business office, and they've just done a fantastic job. Transportation, we outsource all of our transportation, so obviously we'll be entering into a new agreement for transportation for 24-25. We're anticipating a 3% increase there. Food service, as you know, we outsource that, and we have Fresh Picks as the company that manages it. They actually do a fantastic job. If you haven't been to one of our events and been able to sample some of their pizza, you get a chance, come and sample it. It's very good. Chris?
How many students do we transport? How many students do we
Transport, do you know that? We have
That's the
basically,
next week number.
we have, how many buses? Six buses, and I will tell you, they are fairly full. So we're probably transporting the lion's share of kids in Newmarket.
They do 2 routes, except for one bus does 3, I think.
Yeah,
And there's like 70 seats on a bus or something.
yeah.
It's a lot of kids.
So they're very efficient, and given the fact that we've been in a hiring shortage, there've been many days where we've not been able to run all the routes, and they've still managed to get all of our kids. So anyway, so it's been very successful. So any questions about the finance, transportation, or total operating costs?
It's like every kid, 910 kids you transport?
I don't know if every bus is completely full, but
Yeah.
it's a lot.
Yeah, well, there's 990 total kids.
Yeah,
I'd
yeah,
say
almost everybody.
100 kids at the high school drive, and that leaves us everybody else. So there's a fairly small percentage of kids that walk to and from school. So getting into the facilities, I told you about the capital improvement plan that Dave Riley has worked to develop. We're really excited about that. Funding for, we actually, when we looked at our capital improvement plan, we looked at it over 20 years. We recognized that over a 20-year period, we have about $6 or $7 million in potential investments. And we broke it down into what can we build into the ongoing operational budget that we can handle internally. In other words, can our people do it and save us money? And so we've basically budgeted $100,000 into this operating budget, and it's spread out amongst all the buildings to tackle, capital maintenance projects. And then we will be proposing a warrant that will be asking for $200,000 to go into our capital reserve funds for long-range projects, such as when HVAC systems go and we got to replace those and a roof needs to be replaced. But anyway, they're doing a fantastic job. And again, our custodial services, we have GDI as an outsourced company that's doing it, and they manage our custodial services. Questions about facilities? Then the last thing I will mention is technology. Jason Carey is our IT director. If you haven't been following in the news, schools have been the target of an awful lot of cyber attacks lately. The Hinsdale school system just had their system hacked. Nashua was all over the front pages of the paper last spring, having a cyber attack, and there was one other that is escaping me locally that received one. Jason has been very aggressively pursuing cybersecurity, and a lot of things that he is working to do in terms of upgrades of servers and upgrades of services and equipment tie into making us cyber safe, because Jason and I talk all the time. I don't want us to be Nashua. I don't want us to be Hinsdale. I will keep us off the front page of the paper for a cyber attack. And he's doing a great job, I want to say. So anyway, Probably the biggest addition in his budget is we expanded one of his IT people from being a summer position to being a year-round position, and so that shows up in the salary line. Any questions about that?
How many people do you have in that department? 4 people?
Actually, wait a minute, 5.
5 people?
5, right? 5, yes. I forgot to count Deb, and she would be angry at me if I didn't remember her. And then, of course, as I said before, at the beginning, I talked about debt service. This is the last page of this binder is the debt service that we're under, and you can see that the payment schedule through 2046. And then for your reading pleasure, if you turn to page, Appendix B, it outlines our calculations for what our default budget would be in the event that our proposed budget failed. And so Appendix B gives you the default budget, which our default budget, again, going back to the proposed budget, is $27,372,282. The default budget would be $27,066,000.
Some of them don't have.
Yeah, we don't
Which
have
page
that.
is that on?
Oh,
That's not that.
We don't have
Appendix B.
Yeah.
let me send that to you, because that should be in there. My apologies. I have Appendix B, so my apologies. But yeah, so I'll give that to you, and maybe that's something you want to ask me about when I come back a week from now.
Yep.
But anyway, any other questions before we close? You can tell I like to talk about my school, so I apologize for keeping you long. I'm not as brief as Steve was.
Okay. So, we'll have more questions for you next week.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank
for the
you.
explanation. And the only thing I was going to add is, I've said this before, I'll say it again. Janet does a great job, but I really like her footnotes and, this little table of explanations on significant variances is very helpful. Thank you.
And actually, some of that ties into our new financial software and our ability to tease all that stuff out. And so yeah, what we're excited about is that going forward, we'll be able to give a lot more information like that with the new software.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Okay. Right, so next order of business is approving the minutes of the November 27th meeting. Those were distributed the other day. Does anybody have any questions, any adjustments, any amendments? Somebody like to make a motion to accept them?
I'll make the motion.
Okay, Brian Ward makes the motion to accept. Second?
Second.
Brian Hickey makes the motion to accept. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, unanimous. Gary wasn't there, he's abstaining. Okay. All right, well, following that, would anyone like to entertain well, I guess we all know what we're going to do. We've repeated it 5 times. We're going to review, send in our questions, and we'll get them to everybody, and then next Monday we'll have our Q&A session.
Just send you the questions, don't
Send them to
CC
me,
everyone, you'll take
and
care
I'll,
of it.
well, you can CC everybody else, but I'll consolidate them, and then I'll get them out on Wednesday evening, Thursday morning, and then they'll have an opportunity to share them with the department heads. Okay. So, with that said, do we have a motion to adjourn? Brian Rowley has given us a motion to adjourn, second.
Second.
Brian Ward, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.